This is getting crazy as these trade reports do not stop for the Sacramento Kings, as Monte McNair made a trade a couple weeks ago, sending away McDaniels to set up a big blockbuster move. And once again, Brandon Ingram is getting linked to the Sacramento Kings by an outlet that is directly linked to NBA.com. So we'll discuss that and what the Kings would have to give up, as there'd be a significant price out there for Brandon Ingram, particularly in the depth department for the Sacramento Kings. And this is a team that doesn't have a ton of bench depth regardless right now. So this could be a serious risk if Sacramento actually ends up going through with one of these moves beyond the contract implications and everything that's happening. So we'll break down what these reports are saying, what impact it can have on the Kings, and why this is a massive risk for Sacramento if they end up going through with it. So lots of stuff to break down. But again, folks, we are on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and over 84% of our viewers haven't hit the subscribe button just yet. So if you want to stay up to date with all of this latest Sacramento Kings news, and you've been tuning into the vids, enjoying the daily coverage on this exciting Kings team, definitely hit that subscribe button, because we are not slowing down out here on the channel. But let's dive into what's been going on, because essentially reports are percolating. Obviously, there's a bunch of different outlets kind of discussing hypothetical trades involving Zach LaVine, Brandon Ingram, a bunch of guys out there over the off season and, the start of the season for Sacramento. But now an outlet that's directly linked to NBA.com is coming out with their own sort of breakdowns and updates in terms of what's going on. Essentially, the Sporting News, which I'll give context in terms of who they are. They're the official home of NBA.com in Canada, as well as Australia, as well as a few other different countries. So you type in NBA.com, it actually goes to the Sporting News out there in a bunch of countries outside the United States, rather than the actual NBA.com, which is kind of a crazy thing. But they're directly linked to the NBA, and now they're coming out and making these reports, making these, associations, these links in terms of Brandon Ingram going to Sacramento. So we'll break down what's going on here now at this point. Essentially, another star the Kings were interested in the offseason was Brandon Ingram. Ingram was in trade rumors for most of the offseason, but he remains on the New Orleans Pelicans roster to start off this year. He continues to play without a new contract, and the Pelicans could ship him to another team, which could be Sacramento. So essentially, in the trade, the Kings could send Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles, Colby Jones, as well as Orlando Robinson and draft picks to New Orleans in exchange for Brandon Ingram. Now, this is an interesting trade package. This is a very sort of, because in a vacuum, you might look at this and be like, hey, the talent upgrade of a Brandon Ingram out there compared to, one of these guys, that's a steal for Monte McNair, because Ingram obviously has been an all-star, is a guy that can put up some serious buckets, and, is just plays a forward position as well, which the Kings do need some more front court depth on. So, giving up a guy like Huerter, giving up a guy like Trey Lyles in a vacuum, and especially some draft picks, which you don't expect to be that low in the NBA draft, right, might not seem in a vacuum to be a bad move. Because, again, Brandon Ingram, it does need to be said, is a guy that's averaging this season 23 points per game, 6.4 rebounds, 4 assists, shooting 41.4% from the three-point line. Corner threes aren't as elite, but again, is a guy that could shoot the ball, especially in the mid-range area. Brandon Ingram is very good, and he's only 27 years old, so it's not like he's old and washed, and you risk, him being bad and falling off a cliff in a couple seasons. Ingram is a very good basketball player, but where things, and the Kings could also take advantage of the New Orleans Pelicans being in a position like, hey, they brought in Dejounte Murray. They're not having the hottest start to this year and probably aren't that interested in bringing in Brandon Ingram, who's in a contract year, giving him a max extension, giving him one of those big money deals with all the young guys that they have on that roster. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, obviously Dejounte Murray's on the squad, Zion Williamson, a lot of guys out there in that sort of position. So maybe you could take advantage of, that sort of desperate situation right now for the New Orleans Pelicans. So, that's all fair arguments. And I get why these links are coming up, because, again, you can look at it, and basically the article ends up breaking down too, that, Sacramento could also work with Ingram on a new contract. So if they do lose him in free agency after the season, the two sides can agree to a deal. The Kings could set themselves up to be a threat in the West for the foreseeable future if the Kings were able to pull off this blockbuster trade. They would have a perfect blend of playmaking, scoring, and defense, possibly making them the favorites to represent the Western Conference in the NBA Finals at the end of the year to bring the franchise its first title since the 1950-1951 season. So basically, it's, that's kind of the Sporting News' take. That's what this outlet is saying in regards to why this makes sense for Sacramento. And again, I don't want to discredit or don't want to say that this would be, a guaranteed horrible move, because adding talent, it's the same philosophy and the reason why you trade for DeMar DeRozan, right? The more talent you have on the roster, it's easier to find those around the edges players rather than, just trying to beef up the roster and do stuff as is. But the big but out here with this in terms of what's really going on with Sacramento? What are the two things we need? What have we been talking about in all of these videos? One, the Kings need a bit more shooting, and they need more front court depth. Right? They need more guys out there in the front court, more big men that can actually play competent NBA basketball. That's kind of what they need. And in this trade, you're giving up Kevin Huerter, who is a guy that's averaging 12 points, 3 rebounds, 1.3 assists, is playing better on the defensive end, is definitely, without a doubt, one of the Sacramento Kings' best three-point shooters, if not the best three-point shooter out here on the roster, shooting 42% from the three-point line and close to over 57% on corner threes. Like, Kevin Huerter is an elite jump shooter. He can be an elite scorer. We've seen at times over his career, but again, Huerter is a guy that's improved on the defensive end just from the eye test in the first 2 games of the season and brings that dimension of shooting that you need when you have a team of De'Aaron Fox as well as DeMar DeRozan and different guys out there on this roster. So you lose that bit of shooting, and then you also lose Trey Lyles. So again, you might look at 3.3 points per game, 3 rebounds. What are we losing really here? He's shooting 23% from the 3-point line. Well, we've had enough of a sample size of Trey Lyles to know he's at least a competent, forward out there on this team. He plays solid defense. He's 6'9", a legitimate forward that you're losing out there in front court depth for this roster. And again, right, like in a vacuum, right, these two guys for a guy that's putting up these types of numbers makes a ton of sense. And I get it, right? Like, that's something you shouldn't really, just get the talent, get the pieces. I get the argument, but then you also have to look at the Kings roster, the other guys that are out there on this team for Sacramento. And Brandon Ingram does most of his work in the mid-range. DeMar DeRozan does most of his work in the mid-range. De'Aaron Fox, while he can, during stretches of the season be absolutely electrifying from the three-point line, he loves that sort of in-between areas, the floaters, the middies, all that type of stuff. Domantas Sabonis, again, shooting a bit more threes this season, part of the strategy, but doing most of his work in the mid-range. That's 4 guys out there on this roster that all kind of score from the same similar areas. And also, Brandon Ingram's another guy that's not one of those elite defenders, not one of those, magnificent sort of wing guys, even though he has the size, the frame and stuff to be not horrific out there on that end of the floor. But, it's, again, you're not giving up a ton of defense in Huerter and Trey Lyles, but it's not an upgrade in that area. And then you're going to have to pay Brandon Ingram a ton of money in the future moving forward for this team. So then you're essentially locked into that core 5 of Brandon Ingram, DeMar DeRozan, of not Trey Lyles, goodness gracious, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, as well as Keegan Murray. Out there's your top 5, and then Malik Monk. That's kind of your roster there at that point. And I don't think anyone would argue that that's the most complementary of skill sets out there for your team. Now, maybe you lock them in on a contract, you make another couple moves, and then things kind of work themselves out. And that just kind of, is the effective route, the effective path for this team, the best way to construct a roster. And again, I trust Monte McNair. He's done some solid moves. He's increased the level of talent on this team, but obviously we need to see it all fit together. So if the Kings are going to make one of these blockbuster moves, I'd rather see it for, one of the more high upside defenders out there rather than a Brandon Ingram, a guy on a more reasonable contract. But we'll see how things shake out. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about a Brandon Ingram trade. Best to make it this far. Subscribe to the channel. I'm signing out. Cheers.